blow this up.
Look Alive Bomb Squad, we are back for another installment of Let's Blow This Up. I am your host, Jason Sircone. Damn glad to be back on the microphone with you on a Wednesday night. And tonight we are diving deep into the Podcast Professionals Association. If you've been a longtime listener of the show, you may have learned a little bit about this back on season 2 when I was joined by Traci DeForge, and she introduced us all to this brand new organization that, as we now convene tonight, has some legs underneath it. And they are now the season 3 sponsor of Let's Blow This Up. So I wanted to make sure that we were taking time to give them the proper spotlight and help you and the Bomb Squad understand exactly what the Podcast Professionals Association is all about and how it can benefit you, whether you're in a position to become a member or you're looking for somebody to help you get your podcast off the ground or maybe make some tweaks or improvements. Our organization has so many people involved that can help you do things the right way. And tonight you're going to learn all about them and how to make connections with each and every one of them. So without further ado, I'm going to bring the stars of the show to the stage, Jenn Trepeck and Traci DeForge, the founders of the Podcast Professionals Association. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
I'm glad to have you here. Traci, you're back once again, and that's always a good thing. Jenn, first-time caller, long-time fan.
Yes, always. Yeah.
So throughout our conversation, we're going to learn about both of your involvement in the podcast world, and we're going to have a lot of fun in doing that. But let's dive right into the PPA and learn more about the inspiration behind bringing this to life. And what have you experienced, Traci, since we spoke? I think it's probably been at least 6 months. And since your last appearance here on the show, maybe a little bit more than that. So I know, being a part of the organization, I know I said it on the show I was going to join, and I think I did that week. Now I know there's a lot.
I think you did that day, actually. Yeah, it was great. We talked about it, and then right afterwards, Jenn and I saw your application come through, and we were like, well, he's a man of his word.
I knew when you told me what it was all about that it was the type of organization that I had been looking for. Being in the podcast space as long as I have, I know that this was something that we needed. So Now it's here. So let's hear all about it. What inspired the idea, and give us a rundown of what the Podcast Professionals Association is all about.
Yeah, well, so I think that...
Jinx.
Let me start with this. So the fun part about this, I think, is what Jenn and I can share is our literal story and how we came together to co-found this organization. And I think that's just a fun thing for people to know is that, we have indie podcaster turned podcast service professional turned co-founder of Podcast Professionals Association on Jenn's side. And then on my side, broadcast radio professional turned podcast service professional turned co-founder of the Podcast Professionals Association. So we came together in so many different layers and so many different ways. But just for anyone who isn't familiar with the Podcast Professionals Association, it is the only industry's 501c6. So that means nonprofit, the industry's only nonprofit 501c6 trade organization that's purpose and mission is to drive the success of podcast service professionals in the industry, and then as a result benefit podcasters. The better podcasts that are put out there, the more podcasters have an opportunity to grow their show. It supports the entire ecosystem of the podcasting industry. And, we have a lot to share about how we got here and what we do. But I think one of the things that is so important to know is that the mission and the values and everything that we do for the podcast service professionals is for the industry. And that was one of the most important things for us, was to become the 501c6, which when you were asking what has changed, Jenn, right? We are officially certified, I don't know if it's called certified, but we have the status as established is official. It's not pending anymore, which was what we had to say for a year. And so we're really super excited to say that not only is it official, but it's official and legit.
Yeah.
Was that a lot of work to get to that point? I'm assuming if it took a year, there had to be a lot of legwork involved.
That's the government's timing. I think, just like we'll talk about with you tonight and your listeners, right? When you're at that point, when this is not my forte, the next step is not one that I am willing to do the research to figure out or is where my energy is best spent, right? You outsource. And so
yes, 100%, yes.
Right? And so through relationships that, Traci had a relationship with a company that this is what they do is they support nonprofits and helping these things. And so we worked with them to help make it happen because, there are times to bring in experts.
which is another great example, honestly, of what this organization is designed to do. Because if you even walk that story back, so For Purpose Law Group is the law firm that helped us navigate the nonprofit status, but they came to Produce Your Podcast, which is my company, as a client. We helped them launch and grow their show. So when it was time for us to invest in an expert as they invested in an expert to help launch and grow their show, we invested in them to help us get the nonprofit status. But I think we're overlooking a really, really important piece that Jenn and I love to talk about, which is this was never about Jenn and me, and it was never about the two of us. The steps sequence, actually, even prior to the nonprofit designation, was that we created a founder circle. And that was something that was such a game changer. So what we did when we came together and decided, yes, it was obvious a big need in the industry for an organization like this. One did not exist. And in fact, back in 2018, I was actually listening to the Edison research that they do every year when they reveal the results of the Edison research report. And Tom Webster at that time was representing Edison Research. And I remember him saying, what this industry really needs is a podcast professionals association. And I just heard that loud and clear. And I was like, God, he's so right. And so at that point in time, I literally went and secured the domains. And I'm like, I'm going to do this thing. And I sat on it for several years because I did not want to be the face of it, the voice of it, the only person doing it. I didn't want to do it for profit. I wanted to be able to serve that need and that gap in the industry, but I just didn't want it to be just me. And then Jenn and I's relationship during that period of time really evolved over the course of her show growing and evolving, which we can talk about more. But then that's when when nobody was doing it, because honestly, to God, Jason, Jenn and I were really hoping someone else would do it.
Really I know how that goes. Yes.
We're not going to lie about it. We saw the need.
It's not a small lift, and I do think,
not a small lift.
Right. And maybe for your listeners too, to explain sort of what that need is, right? So there are a lot of organizations and places that are supporting big advertisers and people who are putting money into the podcast space, right? So if you think about brands that are spending money to buy ads on podcasts, if you think of the ad agencies, they're different than what we normally think of as ad agencies, but there are agencies and brokers who are between those brands investing in shows and podcast advertising and the networks and the shows. Mm-hmm. And then there are an infinite number of resources for creators, whether that's specific to their hosting platform, who's offering it, a variety of industry leaders and experts and people, right? But then there's this group of people, the editors, the engineers, the producers, the social media managers, there's
guest booking agencies, PR
people. There's a million other people in the mix in this industry who were all scattered and able to help people, but there wasn't anything that brought those people together that said, here's what even standards, there have been some attempts at starting some standardization and some things in the industry of let's just all decide what a producer does. Let's just all decide
what the definition of a host read ad is, or
right.
I mean,
or a sponsorship versus an ad buy, right? There's all of these different words that are used for many things, sometimes the same thing, and so when Traci says, a gap, that's what we mean. There was a gap in the resources and support for people really working in this space.
Yeah. And like I said, when I learned about this from Traci, for me, I thought about the whole picture of, as you said, Jen, there's so many resources out there, but a lot of times, many of us don't know who those resources are, how to get in touch with them, or in a lot of cases that they even exist. And I think that over the years, thinking back to a lot of the practices that I put into place and things that I've learned, there's some things that I said, I really wish I would have known that XYZ was available to me then, because it would have helped me get so much further ahead in a faster pace.
Yeah.
In the long run, I look back, like it gave me time to, work slow and methodically and ultimately get better at my craft. But having that knowledge, even if it's in like the form of a directory, knowing it's there, that these people are there for me to turn to, it could make my plight a lot easier and make these waters a little easier to navigate as I choose to use podcasting either as a big part of my business or even as a small part. It's nice to know these resources are all there.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, that's so important to take into consideration that whether you're a freelancer and an entrepreneur that's a solopreneur, as a consultant or a strategist or an editor, freelance editor, or anything like that, all the way up to a full service production and marketing agency, this industry itself is only 20 years old. That is it's in its infancy. It is still a baby in terms of, worldwide global industry impact. And everybody, whether they're a freelancer through, like I said, a full service agency, is literally having to figure out the wild, wild west as we go. And so what we found is that there's so many people working in independent silos. And of course, with the pandemic and remote work, it made us even more individualized and even more separated. And outside of the conferences once or twice a year, there wasn't really this opportunity to really connect as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as service professionals in this industry, to really identify what's working for you, what's not working for you. How can you support podcasters who want to understand whether or not they need audio and video for their podcast, or where are they promoting their show to grow their show, or if they're a business focused podcast, how are they leveraging that to grow their bottom line? We're each having these independent conversations with our clients, but we weren't having them with each other. And so there was a lot of redundant learning. There was a lot of inaccuracies around the learning, and there was just a lot of trial and error that Jenn and I were like, enough already. Like, we can streamline this learning curve, shorten this learning curve, and everybody will be able to be more economically viable, happier, and just be able to thrive in this industry, whether you're a creator or you're a service professional or you're a person who consumes podcasts. Like, everybody literally wins when the industry grows together.
For me, I think about this. Oh God. I mean, pod fade. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this show. And I really think it stems from people getting into it, not fully understanding the work that's involved, the long-term vision, the commitment that's required to grow and get better at this and produce better content that people are going to sink their teeth into. It takes time for that. And I think I would love to meet the person that said this publicly, that this is a quick fix, do a podcast, it's super easy. Like, come on now. But someone had to have said it because so many people believe it.
Here's the thing. I mean, I do think it's one of the pros and cons of this industry, right? The low barrier to entry is part of what created the medium to be what it is, right? Yes. With that said, as we all know, there is a commitment. There is a level of learning and all these things. If you want the show to play a role in, your business or become a business unto itself or whatever. Right. But there's, Traci and I were doing some consulting last year, and we were leading a workshop. And one of the primary things that people actually wanted to hear was like, if you started your show because you enjoy talking about this thing and it's a hobby and it's in addition to your job and you don't need it to make you money and you're not here for that, just do your thing. Enjoy it. don't worry about all the other stuff. But I do think, there's a piece of the industry conversations that end up pushing people to think that they have to do some of these things. And so it's worth going back to, like, why did you start your show? Is that still why you want to have your show now? And if that's where you're at, stay there and enjoy it and love it and do what you can do, if it serves your purpose and why you started your show.
I am a huge proponent of podcasting on your own terms. And I know there's a lot of narratives out there that will tell you that you can only do this a certain way. Oh, you have to be in front of your audience every week with new, fresh content, or else you're not going to engage enough for them to stick around. And there's other options. And yes, of course, there's pros and cons to no matter what the approach is. There's going to be a pro, there's going to be a con, and it's going to come down to how you present that content, how you're a part of it, how you're engaged with it. You have to weigh out what works best for you. And I think if we led with podcasting on your own terms, doing this in a way that keeps you happy in the process, keeps you engaged, keeps you in it to a point where you keep getting better at it. And as you get better at it, you'll start to see more results, and that will just, like, this all feeds in and of itself. People are going to do this for a much longer period of time if they come into it with that mentality versus what some guru, quote unquote, over here says you have to do it this way. You have to be there every week. Who said that? Who said that's the law? As you said,
They
Traci,
say. Who said? They
right,
say.
it's the thing. It's like there's never been any written documentation that says it has to be a certain way. Yet too many people come into it with that mindset of, well, this is what they said is how you have to succeed. I guess I better do that too. But then if burnout starts to set in, they didn't talk about that. They didn't tell me the ugly side of this. I know with the people I work with, I tell them the whole story up front. That way, at least they know. And if they don't want to do it, that's okay too. There's no shame in that. But
well, and I think too, that's also the evolution of when do you choose to outsource, right? We might start in this place of, I'm going to do it all myself and see if this is something that I want to keep doing. And then if it is, right, then we move to that place of evaluating time and money. What do we have more of, right? We all have finite resources. Sometimes we have more time than money. Sometimes we have more money than time, right? When I worked full time, apparently my phone wanted to talk to us.
To weigh in on that answer.
Yeah.
Special guest, bring him on.
Yeah. When I worked a full-time job, had, my health coaching business on the side, that was not when I was starting a podcast. But if I had, that was a time when I had more money than time, and I probably would have been outsourcing from the jump. Versus, right? And so it just becomes evaluating the resources and where your energy is best spent.
Yes.
To then choose how you want to move it forward.
Amen. That's the biggest part. Evaluate time, evaluate goals, understand what you can devote to making this work. Some people are in a position to where they can do everything themselves. I know a lot of the people that I talk to, and this is why my business exists, they don't want to learn the skill set of editing and production. I'll gladly tell my story and make connections and do that part, because that's the part we all love the most. But that back end heavy lifting, you do that. And I say thank you. And that's how we build these shows.
Right. But at the same time, they also want to work with somebody that they feel like is well vetted, that has trust and credibility, that is not going to, some of the horror stories that I hear of clients that end up coming to work with us, like, oh, I don't have access to any of my files. My editor went MIA and I had a whole season recorded and I have no idea how to access the files. Or this person said that they were an expert and they weren't able to deliver on the promises that they made to me. And I think that's where we really, as an industry, need some level of taking that low barrier to entry. Is not equivocal to just getting a mic and becoming a creator. It's also helps to vet the people who may have started one podcast and had a stroke of good luck out of the gate on that one. Then their friend said, hey, can you help me with mine? Sure. And then that went okay. And so then all of a sudden they hang out the shingle that they're a podcast producer, and talking about getting into something that you don't really understand the intricacies or how much time it's going to take or how to scale it. Like, those are very precise skill sets that are 360 degree comprehensive. It's not based on just coming out of the gate with one podcast success and then launching a business as a result of it. So I think it's so important as a podcaster, as you're starting to evolve into outsourcing, and also like, what do you need to outsource? Because some people would benefit tremendously from a 360 degree full service soup to nuts service. Some people just want their podcast edited so they can get some of that time back, but they don't want to let go of their marketing, or they're totally fine creating their brand assets and things like that. They just need help with some pieces that aren't necessarily what they're good at. So it's also just helping yourself get really clear on what is it you need, who's a good fit for you and your budget, and then what types of services are they going to provide to you that can actually benefit you in the long run to scale and grow your show.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, Traci, right? That's part of why the PPA exists, so that any podcaster can go to podcastprofessionalsassociation.com and see a list of people who are vetted and worth their salt, worth the money that you're going to pay them. And I, from the creator side, hear stories day in and day out of people who are using people from a lot, whether they got a DM on LinkedIn or on another social media platform, or
Fiverr or Upwork.
Right, Fiverr. Like, there's a lot of places.
Which there's nothing wrong with those service platforms. It's just the vetting of the people who are earning income on those platforms.
And the thing that I remind everybody is, if you're hiring from a lot of those places and the price is low enough that you go, okay, why not? Right? Like, what do I have to lose? I think the piece to recognize is that you're expected to be the expert. You're going to have to tell that editor what you want it to sound like. You're going to have to tell them how you want it promoted, versus somebody saying, I have the expertise. Yeah. I'm here to guide you too, right? Like, I'm going to level this up and guide you. You're paying for that expertise in a different way than when, we're taking people who are maybe less expensive. That's great if you have the capacity, the awareness, the knowledge to be able to tell them what you want and what you're looking for.
Yeah. You get what you pay for in a lot of cases. And sometimes you can get enough to get by. They'll give you something that you can use, and you didn't pay much for it, and it did save you that time. So you may be able to chalk it up as a win.
Work.
But absolutely. But if you're truly looking for that high quality experience and looking for a group of experts that have been doing this for years, you're going to have to elevate your thinking a little bit more. And that's where you guys come into play and give that resource to all of us to utilize.
Right. Well, I think too that it's not only that too, but we're really setting the pathway to really look forward to what's happening in this industry. And I think that's one of the things that is so important for the Podcast Professionals Association. You might be a creator listening to this and thinking, what does this have anything to do with me per se? But here's what it has to do with you, is that this is again, brand new industry, not even barely over 20 years old. There's no real set industry standards. Ultimately, the FCC will likely get involved in regulating podcasts just as they did broadcast radio. There are going to be things that are going to add brand safety guidelines, ad guidelines, things that add loads, all of the things that are being created in real time right now, that are precedents that are being set. It's very important to have an association with a seat at the table where these conversations are being held, because otherwise it could be just a complete wild, wild west free for all. And that does trickle down, and that trickles down in a way that you may not feel the impact right now as a creator or as a podcaster, but you ultimately will. And if you want to be assured, if you're building your business, whether it's a business that's leveraging their podcast to grow their business, or as Jenn was saying, if you're building your podcast as your revenue stream, you want to build it on a platform and in a medium that you're going to be able to stick with and stay with and grow with over time. And that's what we want to ensure that happens, and that the right people are at the right tables having the right conversations to protect everybody.
I've had that thought in the back of my mind for a while, and I've talked about it with some people about, we have a lot of freedom right now that more than likely isn't going to be at our disposal forever. More than likely, the government's going to step in at some point in time. We don't know when. Hopefully, it's a long time from now, but they are going to start looking at this medium and saying, where do we need regulation? Mm-hmm. I don't want it, but I'm just trying to be a realist. And people don't want to talk about it because it's like putting that vibe into the world might make it happen faster. Like, I don't know.
Oh, I don't think we have any control over the pace of it. It's coming like a freight train, but it's what happens when it happens. That's the most important piece of it. And I don't think being an ostrich about it is benefiting anybody. But I think, Jason, you and I go back in terms of in the broadcast radio world. And I had the benefit of being in the industry when the FCC deregulated the number of stations you could own in a market. So if you're a podcaster and you're listening to this, think about this right now. At some point, you'd probably never paid attention to the fact that each radio station in your town was owned by a different owner. And so it was fun, and guerrilla marketing was happening, and everybody was enjoying local radio, and everything was happening. You could hear the news in real time. You could hear, sports you can still hear in real time. But in general, it was local radio. And then when the deregulations happened and it was a free for all the companies started consolidating, then all of a sudden your morning show was coming into you in Topeka, Kansas, outsourced from Detroit, Michigan, or you were, so all of these changes that happened affected the people who were listening to the radio, right? But they didn't feel it. They didn't know it was happening. They weren't they weren't having the conversations with the brokers and the people that were involved in these decisions, but they were impacted by them, right? And so, and the industry has never recovered from that consolidation, and so many ripple effects occurred as a result of it. Podcasting is in the same phase right now, pre that window of time. And so if you walk down that path and you know what happened when that happened, you already know we've got to be ahead of this. We've got to be on top of this. We've got to be involved so that we can keep podcasting. What everyone loves about podcasting is that low barrier of entry, is the ability to use your voice to change a conversation, is the opportunity to sell ads on your own if you want to sell ads on your own, or bring in dynamic ads from bigger brands if you want to do that, not have to do it. And so those are the things that you want to protect about the medium, because that's what everybody fell in love with. Nobody who was in broadcast radio or listens to broadcast radio, it's not just those of us who worked in it, it's the people who used to listen to it who no longer do, because the industry got so cannibalized. And that is not what we want. And when I say we, I don't mean Jenn and me or the three of us or the founder circle or the PPA members. I mean, we as a podcast community do not want to see those things happen to our precious medium that became a nice alternate to what had happened when radio itself essentially they ate their own.
It's scary to think about too, because Traci, you would know more than me. There's probably more podcasts that are active than there were radio stations that were getting cannibalized during that period, or am I not thinking big enough on the global scale?
Well, I think that's a really interesting point that I can't answer specifically, but what I can say is that what it did was change the landscape of how radio was consumed. Yeah. So whether it was 4 million podcasts versus 3.9 million AM FM radio signals isn't really the apples to apples comparison as much as what happened to the listener experience when all of these changes were made as a result of the consolidation, and who dies with the most radio signals wins, full on accelerated acquisition phase. And what it did was it just basically took a lot of local independent stations and signals and turned them into, for lack of a better metaphor, strip malls. And so you heard the same music with the same air talents playing the same commercials. So what did that do? That drove people to Apple, to the iPod, to streaming and all of that. Yeah. So let's look at it in terms of what does that mean for podcasting? So right now, the most critical and fundamental core heartbeat of podcasts is the independent local, not local necessarily local geographically, but independent podcast voice who is changing the conversation, whether it's about microbreweries or whether it's about breast cancer awareness and everything in between. You have the ability to open a mic, put your voice out there and make an impact. That's the key, is you have that. There's no barriers on you to do that. And your listener experience isn't affected by any regulations or any inabilities or abilities to do that. That's not necessarily going to ever maybe stay the same. Maybe it will.
Yeah.
But what if it doesn't, or what if it's at risk? Then those rights need to be protected.
No. And you are carrying the torch to make that happen.
There's a collective, right? Like back to the beginning.
It's a collective. Yeah.
It's back to the beginning.
Thank God somebody was being proactive. That's all I have to say.
I mean, that's why if you think back to how we originally started this conversation, is that the seed of the idea was planted through the Edison research, identifying a gap. I was like, because a lot of what I just shared in terms of my previous experience in the industry was like, oh, that is so true. Surely, in my mind, it was like, surely somebody's going to do it.
Well, have you been able to take this full circle and go back to Tom Webster and say, hey, look what we did. We followed your advice. Now we've got this in place. What are your thoughts? Has that happened?
They know we exist. They know we exist. We've had conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a matter of being able to really, because the organization that he is with now sounds profitable, is doing a lot of really great things and has a lot of great partnerships. And I think it's a really good opportunity to work alongside what they're doing and what we're doing. And I think, they've been in the industry now for several years, and they have a little bit of a head start in terms of the amount of traction they have in terms of partnerships, but the missions of the organizations are really very separate. And so I think ultimately we will be able to come together and be able to work alongside each other. But is our goal, Jenn and mine, but also the founder circle and all the members and as a whole, is to work alongside every organization. So it's not just Sounds Profitable making impact in the space. There's other independent podcaster organizations that are making impact in the space that we want to make sure that we're supporting them. And there's a lot of like, for example, one of our members is Todd Cochran, who's the CEO of Blueberry. One of the big things that he's working on right now is certifying podcast consultants, so that there's like, again, if you are hanging out that shingle of podcast consultant, where is the viability around that? Like, what does that mean exactly? And we're in conversations with him about that. Producer Podcast launched the Podcast Management Academy, which is the industry's only certified podcast manager program. There's opportunities in the guest booking space and the PR space. Like that's an area that we haven't even tapped into, is these certifications, so that not only are you vetted when you apply for membership as a PPA member, there's certain criteria that the founder circles establish that, you have to meet a minimum criteria to become a member, so that you have that vetted. And like a podcaster who's wanting to hire knows that they have met this criteria and have been vetted. Yeah. But now there's a whole nother layer of what does a certification look like, so that you can be ensured that the consultant that you hire, that the strategist that you hire, that the podcast manager that you hire has a certification underneath them to even further validate their professionalism in space. So I think there's all kinds of long-winded way to answer your question specifically about Sounds Profitable, but really it's about all of the organizations coming together to really be able to have this baseline and have these guidelines and all be able to agree upon them in a great way.
I like that certification initiative because you mentioned Fiverr and Upwork and all of these different resources out there. Even if you don't come across somebody there, it may could just be through social media conversation, because I see that get abused where people will say, hey, I'm looking for such and such. And then all of a sudden the world, it's like blood in the water, baby. Here come the sharks.
Yeah.
And who do you don't know? How do you sort through that? Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Just don't post that. Reach out to people, whether you independently reach out to us or reach out to someone, like reach out individually to people who have networks, in this space, rather than that, just to save yourself that headache.
It's highly unlikely if they spell the word promoter wrong that they're going to be good at doing promotion. So that's just one way to vet it.
That's something as an entire organization we need to see what we can do. They're coming from Bangladesh and all these places where they're all podcast promoters and Apple iTunes promoters. We need to eradicate that. Not even so much that I think most of us know it's not real. I just can't stand getting 3 a day. I'm just tired of
we're gonna bring this back to the founder circle and see, who wants to work with that relationship and figure it out, because it's part of the stuff that we want to do as an association. It's part of why we create this, and what, an association like this can be poised to do is to get in those rooms and have those conversations and say, if you're the one telling these people that they're certified and this is the way to grow the business, like, we need to all be on the same page.
Amen. I like that a lot. Let's talk about the founder circle, because getting this ball rolling, I'm sure there were some conversations that needed to take place to make people realize the value you were bringing to the table. What did those conversations look like?
Well, I think the first thing that was interesting, I think, when we very first started having the conversation, is that we got 2 responses, nothing in between. We either got, hell yes, somebody needs to do this. We've been waiting on this. Yes, and yes. Like that was and that was the majority of the response. And then there was, again, no gray area. The other side was, I don't really understand why you're doing this. Is there what? Like, is there a need for it? Or we had a couple of situations where people might have been confused that it was another organization for podcasters. And if you're not familiar or haven't been in the industry for a long time, there have been a couple false starts around organizations that were launched for independent podcasters that didn't end up taking off. I think there may have actually been a couple for podcast service professionals that never got the traction. So I think the camp that was like I think that was more of like, okay, girls, we're going to sit back and watch and see what happens. And I'd say that lovingly, but there was a little bit of that. And so we just, said, we've got this.
Said, yep, just you wait.
We've built organizations, scaled organizations before. This is not new. This is new territory in terms of the Podcast Professionals Association, but not new territory for either Jenn or me. But I think what became so gratefully evident was that the right people showed up and said yes, and we had to let go. Our efforts were to reach out and have a wide communication to invite people to be a part of the founder circle. We had to, Jenn and me, and I probably have to say more me than Jenn because she didn't have the boundary issue that I did, but I'm a little bit more codependent than Jenn. That's why we make a good team. But I had to let go of the rejection sensitivity around people who did say no, because I was like, how could you not see the value in this? Or why wouldn't you want to be a part of this? But what by Jenn's help and a couple of other mentors and advisors that we had helped me really see that it was the right people coming at the right time who said yes. And those were the people that were going to build the foundation of this organization. And that's who we did want to show up. And they showed up in spades. I mean, they showed up, they gave of their time very generously. They provided resources to help us pay for the attorney to get our nonprofit designation. They reviewed website copy. They helped us with press releases. I mean, when I say they
created, the criteria. Again, this wasn't us deciding in a vacuum, what the criteria what we wanted the criteria to be. It was, we went to the founder circle and said, all right, all of us, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
And how do we
honestly,
make sure that the same criteria can apply no matter what someone's function in the industry, right? And really, so deeply grateful for that group of people, and all of the insights and guidance, and they're continuing to show up as active members of the Podcast Professionals Association and, be speakers and share the organization and all the things that we're doing. It's just been a tremendous ride.
It is, and I don't think the organization. I know the organization wouldn't be it wouldn't be thriving as much as it is without the founder circle. Wouldn't be as easy and simple. So, like, that's the thing that's so interesting is once something is public facing, it always looks really easy and simple and if it's done right, runs well and is simple. But the back end of that has so many fits and starts and things and they were supportive the whole way. And in addition to that too, like they're all visionaries because they're all industry professionals in this industry. And so their visionary component, along with their tactical skill sets that they brought forth, have just made this organization exactly more than what we could have ever even imagined. And we're just getting started. I mean, I think that's the thing that's so exciting. We've had in-person meetups at the conferences now. We have 2 virtual events a month. Even the outline of the virtual events that we have, which is one is a wisdom forum, which is like the water cooler conversations outside the conference halls, like in real time, virtually every month, and then an inspire and inquire event where we have a speaker, but it's like a presentation designed to be a catalyst for Q&A. And so, but even just those 2 formats of those meetings, that came out of the founder circle conversation. So we really relied heavily on their input and their insights. And then that led to the credibility obviously being solidified. And then that led us to our first media partnership, which we would be fully remiss if we didn't acknowledge James Cridland's support of becoming a Pod News, becoming a media partner with us, which then gave us visibility for one of our member benefits is to have an article, which I think, if I might not be mistaken, next up is Jason's article.
It is in your inbox. I beat the deadline. Even the flu couldn't keep me down, baby.
The flu did not keep you down. And so that has expanded the visibility, and and we started in US and now we're more international. And so it's just been, I think, watching this and just Jenn and I being facilitators, because at the end of the day, that is, we stepped up into the gap and said yes, but then quickly and swiftly after that, we brought the right people in or the right people showed up. We didn't bring them in, but we opened a portal essentially for the right people to show up and it's just been amazing. Like, I just can't even tell you how great I think that it's not only is, but is going to continue to be.
Yeah, and I can speak as I would sound relatively new member, not part of the founder circle, but I know I came in shortly after. As we said earlier, when you started talking about it, I knew this was something that I wanted to be a part of. And I can say, having been an active member, I've gotten a chance to meet some great people. I mean, this is our now 3rd live stream of the season. The first was with Doug Downs. I met him through the PPA. Several of my guests.
Doug's awesome.
Doug's great. And I got so much feedback from that conversation that Doug and I had, because we were digging into the psychology of listenership, and Doug came prepared with these listener profiles and these personas.
He's such a data, like I call him data Doug, because he is such a data guy. I love it.
But it was such a good conversation that I had a few people reach out to me the next day, say that was phenomenal. And I was like, you know what? It's because I took the time to learn about this organization, then join it and make contacts. And a lot of guests throughout this season in the live stream series are all because of the PPA. I met them there and felt like we could have a great conversation here on the show, including both of you. I knew this was going to be a lock to have you both on, especially when we talked about the sponsorship side of things and having the PPA be more a part of this season here on my show. Had to have you both here to tell the story.
Well, thank you.
Sure thing.
And I do think, it's almost like, Jason, that conversation with Doug and the value that listeners got from that is, I think, fundamentally the difference experienced between working with somebody who is truly a vetted professional in this industry and somebody who, is a member of the PPA, right? Like, where there's been some vetting there. Like, you see it, you've experienced the difference. You see what that is,
Yes. And I will say, in being in those, the wisdom forums, just the wide open conversation, it's incredible. I've learned a lot.
The people being willing to be vulnerable about their own business, like that's what I love about it. In fact, one of the Dave Hoffman, which is one of the just tremendous business person, tremendous industry professional, founder circle member, when we were very first defining like who is the target for the membership criteria, I'll never forget this. He was like, I just want to go to a place where I can talk about my clients, not to my clients. And to be super clear, he wasn't meaning to talk badly about them. He was meaning he needed a forum to go and like, I'm dealing with this situation. How have you taken a client and upgraded them from audio to video? What are the price points that are happening if somebody wants to only do this versus that? I mean, we were having to independently solve all of these client relationship driven issues on our own, and to be able to come to the Wisdom Forum without there's no agenda. It's just basically like, hey, this is the win I'm celebrating. That's one of probably my most favorite part is like, we had a member that came to the Inspire and Inquire this past month and pitching an opportunity to onboard 25 new shows. They're small, I mean, not super small, but they don't have the staffing right now if they were to onboard them to be able to manage 25 new shows right away. So then there's other people on the call. Steve Stewart, who is the owner of the Podcast Editing Club and he has an entire army of editors. So then there's the collaboration there. And there's just, and I'm not sharing anything out of school. I'm just saying like people are able to come to these wisdom forums, have these conversations, whether they're frustrated or, hey, my podcasters' download numbers are like, there's something wrong. Like the download numbers for my clients are just bottoming out. What's going on? And then someone else being like, I had that experience and I talked to Apple and here's what they said. And if you're a podcaster listening to this right now, these are the kind of conversations you want your editors to be having. You want your agencies to be having, because they are getting smarter and being able to serve you better as a result of these conversations. And we're just so proud to be just the conduit for them. I mean, we are like showing up, activating the Zoom room, right? But the conversations are taking on a life of their own. Right, exactly. Right. And I mean, I'm getting my own problem solved while I'm there, selfishly speaking, but in all honesty, like that's the vulnerability that people are sharing. And because they're willing to be vulnerable, results are happening. Their businesses are growing. They're coming back. I mean, the engagement in last month's event, like we had to cut off the conversation. It was an hour and 15 minutes and we were already an hour and a half in. And we were like, look, like we love you and we would love to continue this, but we want to respect everyone's time. But if we had not ended that meeting, it probably would still be happening right now. And that was like a week ago.
Was that the Wisdom event or the Inspire and Inquire?
Inspire and Inquire. I know it was the mindset over the metrics. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was flat in the bed during that, so I missed.
Well, there is a recording for you.
I will be waiting for that. But I know that the last Wisdom event, we were going because I was sitting in a coffee shop and I was like, I got to get out of here. They're closing. And we just kept talking. I was like, I don't want to leave though because the conversation is so good. That's where I learned about the buffet at Podfest.
Oh my gosh, Jen and I will never live down the fact that we held a BYOB because we're nonprofit. So, it was buy your own buffet and it was $46 and we're sorry and we're still sorry and we'll always be sorry, but there was no other option. So
right. No Denny's nearby.
And we're always open to people wanting to join the planning committee for the social event.
If anybody else wants to take over the live in-person budget of the nonprofit status events, feel free.
Well, this is the beauty of being the founders. You're putting all the pieces in place. Eventually, you can just delegate everything.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And it can't come soon enough, right?
Right. Listen, it is a labor of love. We are thrilled to be doing it. And as the organization grows and we have more people involved and we can, just keep growing and growing and take on new things and delegate the things that we've already put in place. Like that's the objective.
Yeah.
Well, and the beauty is in the beginning with like it is with anything, right? So we're having so much fun. It's so rewarding, and just seeing just the evolution of going from founder circle to membership, and then having members like you, Jason, who I never would have even met likely, or it would have been a longer time that I would have met you to come into literally my circle of friendship and of professional like-mindedness, and then to have that evolve into being a collaborative co-host for your series, and then having the association be the sponsorship. Like watching those relationships grow is just really fundamentally what we're all about, and we're watching it in real time, and it is so fantastic. It is just really I don't know, it just is what keeps us going. It really does.
I'm a firm believer that you get out of anything what you put into it. And I knew when I joined that this is an opportunity for me to make new connections, but I had to be the one to facilitate those conversations. And doing a lot of networking, I understand the value of having those one-on-one conversations. So that was one of the first things I did, was start establishing one-on-one meetings. And I had a couple of people say, this is a great idea. I'm going to do this too. And I said, you haven't done this yet? But that's just a lot of times everybody comes into these things with a different mindset, a different approach. That's just typically how I approach anything that now that I've skin in the game, I want to make sure I'm getting the most from it. And if I can inspire some people to realize, you know what, hook up with a member and just have a cup of coffee virtually and just talk things out. And I need to do another round of that because there's still some people that I haven't had a chance to talk to. But for me, that was the biggest part, was I'm here. I want everyone to know who I am and what I do. I want to find out if there's ways that we can all collaborate. That's probably not going to get discovered fully in a group environment. So I'm going to take the time to reach out to everybody and set these calls up. And I just remember one Monday, it was just boom, 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 just banged out like 5 or 6 calls. And it was a blast. I had so much fun connecting with everybody in that respect. And that's how I roll. I don't say you have to do it that way. But overall,
but look what everything that you have, as a result of making the investment of that time, all the relationships that you've built and the series that you've created. And now you have an article in Pod News talking about the collaboration and how important collaboration is to grow. And all of this applies whether you're a podcast service professional or you're just or you're just growing your show or just starting out, or you're a podcaster that's trying to build your business around your podcast. All of these things that we're talking about, like, connect with a group of like-minded professionals, have a mentor, find people who can help guide you in getting into these next steps, take advantage of professional organizations and use them to actually network. Don't just put your bio up on the page, like you're the living, walking, breathing representation of what it takes to grow a business and grow a show. And I think, yay.
Yeah, and I still look at Let's Blow This Up as a rather new show. I mean, I don't know the exact number this episode makes, but somewhere in the high 30s, early 40s. And season 3 is really what it all culminated from learning from season 1, learning from season 2, wanting to bring all these different formats into play. But because I took time to make these connections, it made it much easier to find other folks to collaborate with versus having to go through that sometimes very tedious process of, okay, here's a list of names. I'm going to reach out to all of them and see how many get back to me. Like, no, this is a very easy conversation because I had relations like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'd love to have you. And the response from everyone was like, okay, I'd love to be there.
Yeah. And that's been our experience, is honestly anything that we've asked for, any suggestions that we've looked for, and everyone has just not only just shown up with a yes, but a hell yes. And that's what we wanted. That's really what, that's the energy we wanted to bring to the table, where we want everybody to have a seat at. So it's, and I think we might have to move you to the head of the table, Jason. I don't know.
See, okay.
Right.
Putting myself in the middle.
Events. Right.
Yeah. You run the buffet next year. Jason.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Being at the head of the table means you pay for everyone's buffet, just so you know.
All right. I better get to work then.
Yeah. Traci, to your point, and, with all of this, and maybe, put a bow on it for the people listening, like, there's an incredible book out there called 6 Months to Six Figures. And nobody knows about it. I don't know, discovered it, I don't know, maybe 10 plus years ago. And one of the greatest lines in the book is that those who live at a world-class level learn from other people's mistakes to shorten their learning curve. So how many places can you do that? How many ways can you do that? Is it through the friendships that you make, the networking that you do in an organization, the professionals that you hire, right? Like if you hire a vetted professional and they have learning curves from hundreds or even tens or, of other shows, that's what we're talking about, right? It's all of these ways that we can take our experiences and our relationships and help that to build the thing that we're really excited about building, whatever that is for each of us.
Great way to wrap this up tonight. I was going to say, send us home with something powerful about what we need to understand. You're in my head, Jen. I don't even have to ask the questions anymore, which is Jen good because my voice is starting to peter out again.
We always, Jen and I are always like hashtag same brain. So welcome to the club.
I knew if I spent enough time with both of you, I'd get into that circle. So here we are. Well, Jen and Traci, first off, I want to say thank you for joining me here tonight because this has been a great conversation. I think members of the Bomb Squad are getting an incredible look at what you've done with the Podcast Professionals Association. But I also want to thank you for taking the time to be a sponsor of Let's Blow This Up. And it's a great way for our two organizations to collaborate, and anything I can do to shed more light on what both of you are doing and everybody in the group is doing, I am always going to be at the front of the line to make that happen. So hopefully you're feeling the love as much as I am, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening and you feel like that it's something you want to know more about, podcastprofessionalsassociation.com. If you want to reach out to Jen and me, it's so easy. It's info@podcastprofessionalsassociation.com, which I am certain Jason will have in the show notes of the episode. So
once again, Traci in my head as well. I will have all of that information incredibly accessible because I try to make life as easy as I possibly can on the Bomb Squad.
I may have done that once or twice. I don't know. Didn't mean to hijack your clothes or your call to action.
Yeah. Wow. My God, that's a great idea. I should absolutely include a call to action in my show notes. This is good. But
Jason, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure always to chat with you and to serve the Bomb Squad. We're honored. So thank you.
Absolutely. So happy to have you here. It's been a great ride tonight. And for Bomb Squad members, again, follow Traci's advice. Check out the information at podcastprofessionalsassociation.com or hit up her and Jen directly, info@podcastprofessionalsassociation.com. On that note, we are going to wrap up this installment of Let's Blow This Up. We'll be back next week at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube with another live stream. On this episode, I'll be connecting with Julie Brown. Julie is the author of This Shit Works. She is a networking extraordinaire. She speaks all over the country telling people how to network better. We're going to cover some of the ins and outs of networking, both with your podcast and in person. And we got another guest. We had Jen's phone earlier, and now somebody's dog has arrived for the show. On that note, perfect time to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Until our paths cross again, my name is Jason Sircone on Let's Blow This Up. Stay explosive. We'll see you next week.